Who are the Sabeans in Scripture, and why do they matter in Joel 3? The word Sabeans can be confusing because it does not function the same way in every biblical passage. In some places, it clearly refers to an ancient people connected with Sheba or Seba. In another place, especially Ezekiel 23:42, some translations understand the word as drunkards rather than a people group. So before we explain Joel 3, we have to separate two different issues: Sabeans as a historical nation and Sabeans/drunkards as a Hebrew translation issue. Let's start with the most important distinction. In Joel 3:8, the Hebrew text says that the enemy's sons and daughters will be sold to the Sabeans, described as a nation far off. Many English translations preserve that reading. They will sell them to the Sabeans, to a distant nation. This means Joel is speaking about a faraway people, not merely about drunken men. Bible translation notes also explain that the Sabeans in Joel 3:8 were understood as Arab traders from southwest Arabia, far from Judah, and in the opposite direction from the Greeks. But in Ezekiel 23:42, the issue is different. The KJV reads, Sabeans from the wilderness, while many modern translations read, drunkards from the wilderness. Bible Hub's Ezekiel 23:42 comparison shows the split clearly. KJV has Sabeans, while NASB, HCSB, ESV, and others use drunkards. Blue Letter Bible also shows the same translation divide, with some versions reading Sabeans and others reading drunkards or heavy drinkers. The reason for that difference is linguistic. The Hebrew word behind the reading in Ezekiel 23:42 is close enough to the idea of Saba, drinking to excess, that some translators understand the passage as describing drunkards rather than the ethnic Sabeans. Study Light notes that the same Hebrew form can be read as Sabeans or drunkards, and may even function as a double entendre in Ezekiel's context. The New Defender's Study Bible note likewise states that the Hebrew word is very similar to the word for drunkards, which explains why some translations render it that way. So here is the clean teaching point. In Joel 3:8, Sabeans refers to a distant people connected with Sheba/Seba. In Ezekiel 23:42, Sabeans may be a translation choice where the Hebrew can also be understood as drunkards. That distinction matters because if someone reads Ezekiel 23:42 and assumes every mention of Sabeans means drunkards, they will misread Joel 3:8. Joel's point is not drunkenness. Joel's point is distance, exile, slavery, and reversal. Now let's examine where the Sabeans appear in Scripture. The first category is genealogical. The Bible connects Sheba/Seba with ancient peoples descended through biblical lineages. Genesis 10:7 names Seba and Sheba among the descendants of Cush, and Genesis 10:28 names Sheba in the line of Joktan. 1 Chronicles 1:9 and 1 Chronicles 1:22 repeat similar genealogical lines. This shows that Sheba/Seba is not merely symbolic. It is tied to known peoples in the biblical table of nations. The second category is commercial. The Sabeans, or people of Sheba, are often associated with wealth, trade, gold, spices, and distant commerce. 1 Kings 10:1-13 describes the Queen of Sheba coming to Solomon with a great caravan, spices, gold, and precious stones. Ezekiel 27:22-23 mentions merchants of Sheba and Ramah trading with Tyre in spices, precious stones, and gold. Isaiah 60:6 speaks of Sheba bringing gold and frankincense. These passages show that Sheba was remembered as a wealthy trading region. Extra-biblical historical sources support that basic picture. The Jewish Encyclopedia describes the Sabeans as inhabitants of the ancient kingdom of Sheba in southeastern Arabia, known from the Bible, classical writers, and native inscriptions. The Catholic Encyclopedia also describes the Sabeans as a distant people connected with trade, gold, precious stones, perfumes, incense, and possibly slaves in Joel 3:8. The third category is military or raiding activity. In Job 1:15, the Sabeans attack Job's servants and take his oxen and donkeys. That passage presents them as raiders. This does not contradict their role as traders. In the ancient world, the same regional groups could be remembered through trade, raiding, caravan activity, and long-distance movement. A people group could be commercial in one text and violent in another. The fourth category is prophetic submission. In Isaiah 45:14, the Sabeans are described as men of stature who come over and acknowledge Israel's God. That shows the Sabeans could also function as representatives of distant nations, eventually brought under divine authority. Now we can return to Joel 3:1-8. The context of Joel 3 is a divine lawsuit. God says he will restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem. Then he gathers the nations into the valley of Jehoshaphat. The name Jehoshaphat means Yahweh judges. The point is not merely geography. The point is judgment. The charge against the nations is specific. In Joel 3:2-3, God says they scattered his people among the nations, divided his land, cast lots for his people, gave a boy for a prostitute, and sold a girl for wine. This is not vague oppression. It is land theft, exile, human trafficking, and contempt for human life. Then Joel 3:4 names specific regional offenders: Tyre, Sidon, and the regions of Philistia. These were coastal powers. That matters because coastal peoples had access to ports, ships, and commercial trade networks. According to the text, they sold Judah's children to the Greeks, or Javan, to remove them far from their border. Then the reversal comes in Joel 3:7-8. God says he will raise the captives from the place where they were sold, return the deed upon the heads of the sellers, and sell their sons and daughters into the hand of Judah. Judah will then sell them to the Sabeans, to a nation far off. This is the heart of the passage. Joel is teaching measure for measure judgment. The nations sold Judah's children far away. Therefore, their own children will be sold far away. The nations treated Israelites like merchandise. Therefore, their own children become merchandise in the judgment. The nations scattered Judah. Therefore, scattering comes back upon them. This principle is often called lex talionis, meaning measure for measure justice. Joel does not teach it as an abstract doctrine. He teaches it through geography. Judah's children were sold westward toward the Greeks. The enemy's children are sold toward the Sabeans, a far-off people in another direction. Translation commentary on Joel 3:8 explains this directional contrast. The Greeks were far from Jerusalem, while the Sabeans were far away in the opposite direction from Tyre, Sidon, and Philistia. So the Sabeans in Joel 3 are not the main villains. They are the far-off buyers in the reversal scene. Their role is to show that the judgment is complete. The oppressors do not merely lose a battle. They experience the kind of displacement they inflicted on Judah. Now we need to address the Hebrew and Greek Septuagint difference. In the Hebrew tradition, Joel 3:8 says Sabeans, but in the Greek Septuagint, the verse can be rendered as selling them into captivity to a far distant nation. Study Light's Breton LXX text of Joel 3:8 gives the Greek-style reading as, "They shall sell them into captivity to a far distant nation." That changes the emphasis. The Hebrew reading gives you a people, Sabeans. The Greek reading gives you a condition, captivity. The Hebrew reading is more geographical. It shows the far-off destination of the reversal. The Greek reading is more thematic. It emphasizes that the oppressors become captives. This does not destroy the meaning of the passage. It gives us two interpretive layers. In the Hebrew layer, Joel is saying, they will be sold to the Sabeans, a distant people. In the Greek layer, Joel is saying, they will be sold into captivity to a distant nation. Both readings preserve the same central judgment. Those who sold others away from home will themselves be sold away from home. Now we can answer the bigger question. Does Joel 3 mean all nations are literally sold into slavery to the Sabeans? No, not exactly. At the local level, Joel names specific offenders: Tyre, Sidon, and Philistia. Those are the groups directly connected to the slave trade reversal in Joel 3, 4-8. At the global level, Joel says God will gather all nations into judgment. That means the local case becomes the model for the larger judgment. The Sabeans are not necessarily buying every nation in a literal sense. Instead, the Sabean reference shows the principle by which all nations are judged. What they did to God's people returns upon their own head. This is why Joel 3, 1-8 is the legal indictment. Later in Joel 3, the nations are summoned to war, the valley fills with multitudes, and the day of the Lord draws near. But verses 1-8 explain why judgment comes in the first place. They scattered God's people. They divided God's land. They trafficked Judah's children. They profited from exile. So God reverses the transaction. This is also why Joel 3 should be connected with other biblical judgment passages. Obadiah 15 says, "As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head." That is the same measure for measure principle. Jeremiah 50:15 says of Babylon, "Take vengeance on her. As she has done, do to her." Revelation 18:6 says of Babylon, "Pay her back as she herself has paid back others." These passages show that Joel's logic is not isolated. It belongs to a wider biblical judgment pattern. Now let's summarize the teaching clearly. First, Sabeans can refer to a real ancient people connected with Sheba/Seba, trade, wealth, Arabia, and long-distance commerce. Biblical examples include Job 1:15, Isaiah 45:14, Ezekiel 27:22, and Joel 3:8. Second, Ezekiel 23:42 is a special translation issue. Some translations read Sabeans, while others read drunkards, because the Hebrew wording can be understood differently. That does not control the meaning of Joel 3:8. Third, Joel 3:8 uses the Sabeans as a far-off destination in a judgment reversal. Judah's children were sold away to the Greeks. The enemy's children are sold away to the Sabeans. Fourth, the Hebrew and Greek traditions emphasize different aspects. The Hebrew emphasizes the Sabeans as a destination. The Greek Septuagint emphasizes captivity as the condition. Fifth, the passage does not require every nation to be literally sold to the Sabeans. Rather, the specific reversal against Tyre, Sidon, and Philistia becomes the pattern for how all nations are judged. So the best way to teach this is simple. When Sabeans appears in Job, Isaiah, and Joel, it usually points to a historical people connected with Sheba/Seba and the distant trade world of Arabia and the Red Sea. When Sabeans appears in Ezekiel 23:42, the word may instead be read as drunkards, depending on the Hebrew reading and translation choice. But in Joel 3:8, the Sabeans are not drunkards. They are the far-off nation used to complete the reversal of Judah's captivity. The final point is this. Joel is not merely identifying an ancient people. Joel is teaching how divine judgment answers human injustice. The sellers become the sold. The traffickers become captives. The nations that scattered Judah are gathered into judgment. And that leaves the question Joel wants the reader to face. If God judged ancient nations by what they did to Judah, how will he judge the nations when all of them stand in the valley of Jehoshaphat? Now this is where the discussion becomes deeper. Because even though Joel 3:8 is speaking about a far-off people, the Sabeans, the prophets also use drunkenness language symbolically when describing judgment, blindness, and national collapse. So the question becomes, can the imagery of drunkards still connect conceptually to Joel? The answer is yes, but at the level of prophetic symbolism and typology, not by replacing the Sabeans themselves. Look carefully at Joel 1:5. Awake, ye drunkards, and weep, and howl, all ye drinkers of wine. In Joel 1, drunkenness becomes a symbol of spiritual blindness and judgment. The land is being destroyed, but the drunkards are asleep to what is happening around them. Then move forward to Joel 3:18-19. Joel describes mountains dripping with wine, waters flowing, Judah preserved, but Egypt and Edom becoming desolate because of violence against Judah. So Joel already connects wine imagery with judgment imagery. Now compare that with Isaiah. Isaiah 28:1 speaks about the drunkards of Ephraim. But Isaiah is not merely describing intoxicated individuals. He is describing a nation spiritually corrupted, morally unstable, and ripe for judgment. Then Isaiah 29:9 says, "They are drunken, but not with wine. They stagger, but not with strong drink." That is prophetic language for spiritual confusion, blindness, and divine judgment. Now here is where typology becomes important. Biblical typology happens when a historical event, people, or judgment pattern becomes a larger prophetic model that points beyond itself. Joel 3:8 operates exactly like that. Historically, the Sabeans are a real distant people connected with trade routes, Arabia, commerce, and far-off exile. But typologically, the Sabeans also become a prophetic picture of complete removal, displacement, and judgment returning upon the oppressor. That is why Joel emphasizes a nation far off. The distance matters. The nations push Judah far away from their inheritance. Therefore, the judgment sends the oppressors far away in return. So the Sabeans are not merely an ethnic detail. They function as a typological endpoint of reversal. And once you understand that, the drunkenness imagery surrounding Joel becomes even more significant. Because throughout the prophets, drunkenness represents nations under judgment. Confused nations, staggering nations, blind nations, nations ripe for collapse. So even though Joel 3:8 itself still refers geographically to the Sabeans, the surrounding prophetic atmosphere allows the imagery of drunkenness to reinforce the typology of judgment. The oppressors become like the drunken nations of Isaiah, staggering, confused, under wrath, and overtaken by divine reversal. That means the Ezekiel 23:42 translation issue does not completely sit isolated from the broader prophetic world. Even if Joel 3:8 literally refers to the Sabeans as a far-off people, the prophets already established an association between drunkenness imagery and judgment upon nations. So the connection works on multiple levels. Historically, the Sabeans are a real South Arabian people. Geographically, they represent a far-off destination. Typologically, they symbolize complete reversal and displacement. Prophetically, the drunkenness imagery surrounding the prophets represents nations collapsing under divine judgment. So the mistake would be collapsing every category into one. Joel 3:8 does not mean the drunkards instead of the Sabeans. Rather, Joel uses a real historical people within a larger prophetic typology of judgment, exile, reversal, and the collapse of the nations under divine justice. The Sabeans in Scripture are a real ancient people, connected with trade, caravans, Arabia, gold, incense, and long-distance commerce. But the prophets speak in layers. One layer is historical. One layer is geographical. One layer is symbolic. One layer is typological. In Joel 3:8, the Sabeans are the far-off nation used in the judgment reversal. The nations sold Judah far away, so judgment sends the oppressors far away in return. That is the heart of Joel. Measure for measure judgment. The sellers become the sold. The scatterers become scattered. At the same time, the prophets use drunkenness imagery symbolically. Joel and Isaiah describe nations as drunk to represent blindness, confusion, arrogance, and collapse under divine judgment. So Ezekiel's translation issue involving Sabeans and drunkards does not replace the meaning of Joel 3:8. Instead, it exists within the same prophetic world of judgment symbolism. The prophets are teaching one central truth: divine judgment answers human injustice. And in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, every nation faces the consequences of what it has done. We thank you for watching, and if you would like to see more content like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell, and you will be notified when content drops or our live classes have started. Shalom.